She slammed the door on the millionaire who betrayed her. 3 years later, he met the sons he never knew existed. Olivia Bennet didn't remember how she made it from the restaurant to Lucas's apartment. Her heart was racing so violently it felt like it might collapse her ribs from the inside. Her hands were shaking, still clenched from what she'd just seen. Lucas, sitting at a candlelit table, across from a stunning brunette, laughing in the same effortless way he used to laugh with Olivia. He hadn't noticed her standing across the street. Or maybe he had and chose not to react. That hurt more than the image itself. It wasn't the woman that shattered her. It was the familiarity, the ease, the timing. Olivia had just found the courage to tell him about the baby, his baby. She'd rehearsed the moment in her head all day, imagined every version of how it could go. She never imagined she'd see him with someone else first. By the time she arrived at the apartment they had once shared, all that was left of her calm was rage held together by heartbreak. Lucas opened the door with a relaxed smile, still in his crisp shirt and blazer, not expecting anything unusual. His expression changed the moment he saw her face. "I saw you with her," Olivia said, her voice cold, quiet, final. Lucas blinked, stunned. "Wait, Olivia, it's not what you think." But she was already stepping back, one hand on her stomach protectively, the other grabbing the door. He reached out, but she slammed it before he could say another word. The echo of the door shutting between them was louder than anything they'd said. In that moment, something inside her broke, but something else hardened. Olivia had always been forgiving. Always soft. Always understanding. But this was a line she couldn't ignore. She had given her trust to Lucas Rivers, the golden boy of the tech world, the charming CEO with icy blue eyes and ambition bigger than any skyscraper. She had believed he saw her not just as someone temporary, but as someone real. She had been wrong. That night, Olivia didn't cry. Not at first. She packed a bag with shaking hands, left her keys on the counter, and walked out into the city with nothing but a child growing inside her and a future she would have to build alone. It was raining. She didn't run from it. She let it soak her completely. By morning, she was on a train heading north, far away from New York, from the flashing cameras, from Lucas's billion-dollar empire. She found a small town 2 states over, quiet, slow, safe. She rented a modest house with peeling paint and overgrown grass. The landlord didn't ask too many questions. That was good, because she didn't have many answers. Her pregnancy progressed with loneliness as her closest companion. There were doctor visits she attended alone, ultrasounds she watched with bittersweet awe, and baby books she read in the middle of the night because sleep didn't come easily. The image of Lucas with another woman never left her. Every time she tried to rationalize it, tell herself maybe it really was innocent, the pain pushed back harder. She didn't want explanations anymore. She wanted peace. When the twins were born, 2 perfect boys with brown hair and crystal blue eyes, she named them Jake and Noah. She gave them both her last name. No middle names. No traces of the man who had vanished from their lives before they ever took a breath. They were hers. Entirely. And yet, no matter how far she ran, Lucas Rivers remained a name whispered by the world. He was everywhere, in headlines, in commercials, in interviews talking about innovation and vision, never once mentioning the woman he left behind or the sons he didn't know he had. Olivia muted every mention of him. She stopped looking at magazines, stopped watching tech news. But sometimes, late at night, she would wonder if he ever felt it. That something was missing. That somewhere, 2 boys who looked just like him were learning to laugh, to walk, to live, without him. She told herself she didn't need him. She believed it. Most days. But the truth, buried under all the layers of strength and silence, was that some part of her still remembered who he had been before the lie. Before the betrayal. The man she had loved. The man she had trusted enough to carry a future inside her. But that man was gone. And she had to become someone strong enough to never look back. Life in the quiet coastal town of Morro Bay moved at half the pace of New York, but for Olivia, it was exactly what she needed. The salty air, the rhythm of the tides, and the lack of questions gave her something she hadn't felt in months: control. She didn't know a soul when she arrived, and that anonymity became her shield. She rented a small weather-worn cottage just outside town, close enough to the market but far enough from neighbors. The walls were thin, the heater unreliable, and the roof creaked during every storm, but it was hers. A place to disappear, to heal, and to prepare for what was coming. Her pregnancy progressed in a haze of quiet resilience. Olivia had never imagined she would face it alone, but as the days turned into weeks, she adapted. She learned how to manage fatigue while working from home, balancing freelance design projects with prenatal vitamins and endless reading. She researched everything obsessively: natural births, baby sleep patterns, breastfeeding schedules, because planning gave her something to hold on to. She didn't have Lucas, but she had knowledge, and that made her feel less afraid. The first time she heard both heartbeats during an ultrasound, she cried, not because she was scared, but because in that moment, the loneliness gave way to something else entirely: awe. Two of them. Two tiny lives. She hadn't expected twins, and the thought of raising two children without support was overwhelming, but she also felt an electric kind of joy. It meant she wouldn't be alone. Not really. As her belly grew, she began talking to them. At night, she would lie on her worn-out couch and speak softly to the little boys she hadn't met yet. She told them stories of her childhood, about her love for art, about music and the stars. She never mentioned their father. Not once. She convinced herself they didn't need to know. That their world would be full even without a missing piece. When labor came, it was long and brutal. Olivia had no one in the waiting room, no one to pace the halls with worry, no one to hold her hand when pain twisted through her body like lightning. But she pushed through it with every ounce of strength she had stored in her soul. When Jake arrived, he let out a sharp, defiant cry that echoed through the room. Moments later, Noah came quietly, his little chest rising and falling with the calm of someone older than his minutes. The nurses smiled and called them "miracle boys." Olivia held both in her arms, skin to skin, and in that moment, she knew her life would never again belong only to herself. The early months blurred into each other. Sleepless nights, bottles at 3 a.m., lullabies sung between yawns and tears. Jake was restless, always kicking, curious, impossible to keep still. Noah was gentle and slow to cry, always watching his brother with wide, thoughtful eyes. Olivia kept a journal where she wrote everything: the milestones, the fears, the funny things they did. It became her way of recording a story only she witnessed. But there were hard days too. Days when the isolation felt crushing. Days when both boys were sick, and she had to run between their cribs with a thermometer in one hand and cold compresses in the other. There were moments she stared at her phone, tempted to look him up, to see his face, even if only for a second, but she never let herself type his name. The temptation to reach out was always crushed by the memory of that night, of how quickly he had smiled at someone else, of how quickly he had become a stranger. And yet, Lucas's absence was everywhere, in the questions the pediatrician asked about family history, in the blank space on the birth certificate, in the fact that she alone had to decide everything about their future. Still, she carried it. For them. Over time, the town slowly became familiar. The woman at the bakery always saved Olivia an extra cinnamon roll on Fridays. The old man who ran the hardware store gave her a used space heater for free when he learned she had twins. She wasn't close to anyone, but she was no longer invisible. She became the brave young mom with the beautiful boys. No one asked about their father. No one needed to. Everyone assumed what she let them assume. When the boys turned 2, she hosted a small party in the backyard. Just balloons, cupcakes she baked herself, and a playlist of soft acoustic songs they liked to dance to. Jake ran in circles chasing bubbles. Noah tried to stack plastic blocks on a folding chair. Olivia watched them, knees in the grass, and realized something simple and devastating: they were enough. And yet, a piece of her still carried the story she had buried, the love she once had, the betrayal she never got to resolve, and the truth she had never dared to tell. Because no matter how hard she tried to erase Lucas from her life, she couldn't erase him from their faces. Every time Jake raised his eyebrow just like him or Noah narrowed his eyes when he was focused, she felt the echo of a man who had no idea what he'd left behind. But she never said a word. Not yet. Not ever, if she could help it. Because her boys deserved a life without ghosts. And she had finally built one. By the time Jake and Noah turned 3, Olivia had developed a rhythm that, while exhausting, made her feel powerful in a way she had never known before. Her days began before the sun and ended well after the boys had drifted off to sleep. Every morning, she made them oatmeal with banana slices, combed their soft brown hair, and listened to their little voices argue over which color socks to wear. It was chaotic and tender, and every detail mattered. She had become the kind of mother she never thought she'd have to be, present in every second, even when her body ached for rest and her mind spun with worries she couldn't say out loud. Jake had grown into a whirlwind of energy, always bouncing from one activity to another, shouting questions, pointing out the obvious as if discovering it for the first time. He loved trucks, dogs, and music, and would sing at the top of his lungs even if he didn't know the words. Noah, in contrast, was quiet and observant, often choosing to watch his brother from a distance before joining in. He was gentle with animals and people alike, with a thoughtful gaze that made Olivia wonder what he might be thinking. She often said they were night and day, but both were born under the same storm of love and pain. She couldn't imagine one without the other. Their bond was unbreakable. Even when they fought, they made up within minutes. If Jake scraped his knee, Noah would run for a band-aid. If Noah couldn't reach a toy, Jake would drag a chair across the room without asking. They spoke their own language sometimes, half words, half looks, and Olivia often felt like she was observing a little universe that had formed between them, one she had the honor of orbiting. Work was steady, but never easy. Olivia took on freelance projects at night while the boys slept, designing logos and websites for small businesses and local artists. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, kept food on the table, and allowed her to stay home with the twins during the day. She sacrificed everything for that freedom: sleep, comfort, social life, but it was worth it. They were worth it. Still, even in the quiet safety of the life she had built, there were moments of piercing uncertainty. Sometimes, when the boys played outside, Olivia would sit on the porch and watch the street, half expecting a black SUV or a familiar figure to appear. She'd shake the thought away. Lucas didn't know where she was. And even if he did, he hadn't come looking. That was the truth she clung to. He had made his choice. She had made hers. Then came the photo. It happened on a warm spring morning at the farmer's market. Olivia had taken the boys to pick out strawberries and sunflowers, something they did every Saturday. A local photographer was documenting mothers in the wild, snapping candid shots of families as part of a feel-good blog project. Olivia didn't think much of it when he asked to take a few pictures. She agreed politely, held Jake's hand in one and Noah's in the other, and laughed as they pulled her toward a giant pile of fresh bread. The photographer thanked her and handed her a business card, promising to tag her if the photos were used. She forgot about it almost immediately. But a week later, her face was everywhere. The blog post had gone viral: "Single mother of twins captures hearts at Morro Bay Market." The comments were flooded with praise, questions, speculation. People wanted to know who she was, where she came from, how she managed it all on her own. Someone reposted it on Twitter. Then Instagram. Then the national parenting forums. Olivia tried to ignore it, told herself it would blow over. But the photo, her laughing in the sun, with two boys who mirrored Lucas's eyes, was now floating through the internet like a signal flare. She didn't sleep for 3 nights after it happened. The possibility of being found, of her past catching up to her, gnawed at every edge of her mind. She checked her email compulsively, then hated herself for doing so. On the 4th day, it happened. She opened her inbox and froze. A new message. No subject line. Sender, Lucas Rivers. She stared at it for almost 10 minutes before clicking. There were only 3 words inside. Olivia. It's me. No explanation. No accusations. No anger. Just a presence, reappearing in her world like a ghost that suddenly remembered it had once been real. She didn't reply. She couldn't. Her hands trembled, her breath caught in her throat. The boys were napping. The house was quiet. But inside her chest, everything screamed. Lucas had found her. And nothing would ever be the same again. Olivia didn't open the email again for 3 days. She read it once, those 3 simple words, and then let it sit in her inbox like a ticking clock. She went through the motions of her routine, dressing the boys, feeding them, going on walks, but something had cracked in the calm she had so carefully built. She couldn't stop wondering how he'd found her, whether he had seen the photo himself or if someone else had sent it to him. And most of all, she wondered why, after all this time, he was reaching out now. On the 3rd night, after the boys had fallen asleep tangled together in their tiny shared bed, Olivia sat in the dark at her kitchen table. The lamp above flickered gently as the cursor blinked on a blank reply screen. She didn't know what she wanted to say. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, to hurl every painful memory back at him in jagged fragments. Another part of her wanted to delete the email and pretend it had never come. But the part she couldn't ignore was the one that whispered the truth: he had a right to know. Not to claim. Not to erase the past. But to know. Her reply was brief. I don't know why you're writing. But they exist. They are beautiful, and they are mine. I don't need anything from you. I just need you to understand that you gave them nothing, until now. She didn't expect a response. She sent it and closed the laptop as if shutting it might seal away the part of her heart that had just cracked open again. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words. But Lucas did reply. The next day. I don't want to take anything. I just want to see them. Or you. I've made mistakes. But please, let me at least explain what happened. Olivia stared at the screen for a long time. She remembered his voice, his laugh, the way he used to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear when she was too stubborn to cry. She remembered the betrayal too. The other woman. The unanswered calls. The silence that followed. And now here he was, asking for a conversation he should have fought for years ago. She didn't answer that day. But the following week, she told him to come to Morro Bay if he was serious. She gave no address. No promises. Just a place and a time, the park near the water, Friday at noon. She didn't know if he'd come. She didn't know if she truly wanted him to. Friday arrived with a sky half filled with clouds and wind off the ocean that carried the scent of salt and seaweed. Olivia wore a sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a low braid. She kept the boys home with a sitter. This moment, this confrontation, wasn't for them. Not yet. When she saw him walking up the path, something in her chest twisted. Lucas looked older. Not aged in a bad way, but changed. His face was sharper, his eyes more hollow, as though time had worn away the perfect exterior he'd always maintained. He wasn't in a suit, just dark jeans and a jacket, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. He looked like a man who had been waiting for this moment far longer than she had. "Hi," he said when he reached her, voice quiet, as if trying not to break the fragile air between them. Olivia didn't speak at first. She studied him, unsure whether she was looking at the man who had once made her feel invincible or the man who had let her vanish without a fight. "I saw the photo," he said. "At first, I thought it couldn't be you. But then I saw the boys." "They're not just boys," she replied. "They're your sons." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the weight of those words pressed down like gravity. "I didn't know. Olivia, I swear. If you had," she interrupted, her voice rising, "what? You would have stayed? You would have fought?" "Because the man I saw with another woman that night didn't look confused, Lucas. He looked happy. He looked stunned. That woman, she was my sister. I didn't get the chance to tell you. I didn't want her addiction all over the media, so I kept it private. I was going to propose to you that week. The ring was already in my pocket when you left." Olivia felt her stomach drop. The words hit her like cold water, and for a second she forgot how to breathe. "No. Don't say that." "It's the truth," he said. "But I didn't chase you. That's on me. I thought you left because you didn't want the life I was building. I thought, maybe you never really wanted to stay." She turned away, tears stinging the corners of her eyes, not because she believed him right away, but because some part of her always feared there was more to the story, and now here it was, spilling out into the cold wind of a place she had once considered safe. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back?" Lucas took a step closer, but not too close. "Because I saw them. Because I realized I lost the most important thing I ever had, and I didn't even know it. And because I don't want them to grow up thinking their father never cared. I can't erase what I did. But I can show up now. If you'll let me." The wind rustled the trees, and Olivia stood still, heart torn between past and present. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to believe. But she knew the boys would one day ask who their father was. And when that day came, she wanted to be able to tell them that he at least tried. "I'm not promising anything," she said. "But maybe you can meet them. One step at a time." Lucas nodded, eyes damp but steady. One step at a time. And for the first time in years, something that had been broken began, slowly, to repair itself. Not with forgiveness. Not yet. But with truth. And that was a start. Lucas waited 3 days before Olivia agreed to let him meet the boys. She didn't tell Jake and Noah much. She didn't know how. How do you explain to 3-year-olds that a man they'd never met before had once been supposed to stay, but didn't? She told them a friend was coming to visit. She practiced answers in her head to questions they might ask but hoped they wouldn't. Her stomach stayed in knots the entire day. She arranged the meeting at the local botanical garden, a wide, open space where the boys could run freely and she wouldn't feel trapped. She didn't want them to feel like they were being examined, and she didn't want Lucas to think for a moment that this would be easy or casual. This was the most important moment of their lives so far, even if the boys didn't understand it yet. Lucas arrived early. He was dressed simply, in a soft gray sweater and dark jeans, and held a small toy truck in one hand and a storybook in the other. Olivia wasn't sure if the gifts were a good idea or not, but she appreciated that he didn't come empty-handed. She stood back as he waited nervously near the entrance, checking his watch, looking around like a man trying not to panic. When the boys arrived with her, Jake immediately charged toward the flowers, shouting something about finding a butterfly. Noah, more cautious, clung to Olivia's leg, eyeing Lucas with quiet curiosity. Lucas didn't rush them. He crouched down and waited until they came closer. He didn't speak right away, just offered the truck to Jake and held out the book toward Noah. Jake, true to form, took the truck without hesitation and started racing it through the gravel. Noah stared at the book, then slowly walked forward and took it in his small hands. Lucas looked at Olivia for permission. She gave him a small nod. And then, he spoke. "Hi," he said gently. "I'm Lucas. I'm someone who's very happy to meet you." Jake didn't respond, too focused on making engine noises. But Noah nodded once, serious and calm, and said, "Hi." That was the beginning. They walked together through the gardens for over an hour. Lucas stayed at the boys' pace, never taking over, never pushing conversation. He asked what their favorite colors were, if they liked dinosaurs or space more, what songs they liked to sing. Jake answered every question with delight, while Noah often waited, then added his own thoughts with quiet wisdom. Olivia watched it unfold with a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. This was the man who had missed every birthday, every fever, every first word. And yet, he was here. Present. Listening. As they sat on a bench beneath a canopy of wisteria, Jake climbed onto the backrest and pretended to be a pirate. Lucas offered to read to Noah, who was already flipping through the pages of the book he'd brought. Olivia sat beside them but didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her eyes never left the scene, a man who had once vanished reading gently to a boy who didn't even know what a father was supposed to be. When it was time to go, Jake said, "Are you coming to our house next time?" Olivia's heart stopped for a moment, but Lucas looked at her before answering. "That's up to your mom," he said. "But I'd like that." Noah looked up at him. "Do you know how to make pancakes?" Lucas laughed softly. "Not very well. But I can learn." That night, after the boys were asleep, Olivia sat on her porch with a blanket wrapped around her legs and stared out into the dark. Lucas had walked them home but didn't stay. He thanked her. Said he wouldn't call unless she said it was okay. He left her with no pressure, no promises, just the feeling that something might finally be shifting. She thought about how easy it would be to fall into the past again, to imagine him holding her like he used to, whispering apologies and dreams they once shared. But she wasn't the woman he had left behind. She was stronger now. And she wasn't doing this for nostalgia. She was doing it for Jake and Noah. For the chance that they might know a version of their father who wasn't perfect, but present. That, more than anything, was what they deserved. And if Lucas kept showing up, not in grand gestures, but in quiet consistency, maybe, just maybe, he could become someone worth forgiving. Not for the past. But for the future they might still build. Over the next few weeks, Lucas began to show up every Saturday morning like clockwork. At first, Olivia kept things cautious. She never left him alone with the boys, always stayed nearby, watching with a quiet intensity. But slowly, as she observed his consistent patience, his gentle attentiveness, and the sincere effort in his eyes, she began to let her guard down, piece by piece. The boys, however, needed no convincing. Jake quickly attached himself to Lucas as if he'd always been there, dragging him into imaginary games, insisting he build Lego towers and chase them through the backyard like a dinosaur. Noah took longer. He would sit close but rarely touched, watching Lucas with silent eyes, as if waiting to see if this new person would vanish too. But even he began to lean in, especially when Lucas read to them or sat cross-legged on the floor drawing ridiculous stick figures at their command. Olivia began to see a side of Lucas she had never known. He was softer now, stripped of the arrogance and image he used to carry like armor. He didn't talk about his company unless asked. He never brought his phone out when he was with the boys. He didn't ask for forgiveness or try to make grand declarations. He simply showed up, week after week, on time, with his sleeves rolled and an expression that said he knew how much he had to prove. One Saturday afternoon, as Lucas helped Olivia wash the boys' paint-covered hands in the kitchen sink, Jake suddenly turned to him and said, "You can come on Wednesdays too. Not just Saturdays." Olivia froze, unsure of how to respond, but Lucas just smiled and looked to her for permission. She gave a small nod. From that week on, Wednesdays became their second ritual. He would bring takeout and play with the boys until bedtime, often helping Olivia clean up afterward. They never talked much about the past. The unspoken agreement between them was clear: the past was heavy and jagged, but the present had to be soft enough to build trust. One evening, while folding laundry together in the living room, Olivia finally asked the question that had been sitting at the edge of her heart for weeks. "What made you stop looking?" Lucas paused, his hands buried in a pile of tiny socks. "I didn't know how to," he said quietly. "After you left, I thought you didn't want to be found. I thought you hated me so much that disappearing was your way of telling me it was over. And honestly, I didn't know if I deserved to find you." He looked at her then, eyes full of something that felt like regret soaked in truth. "But I should have tried harder. I should have known you wouldn't have just walked away for nothing." Olivia didn't respond right away. The boys' laughter echoed from their bedroom down the hall. She thought about the nights she'd spent rocking them to sleep, the birthdays she'd planned alone, the loneliness she had fought like a disease. "You missed so much," she whispered. "You missed everything." Lucas nodded slowly. "I know. And I'll never get that time back. But if you'll let me, I want to be here for everything that comes next." Their connection wasn't romantic again, not yet. But something deeper was forming between them, a quiet partnership rooted in parenting, in redemption, in the slow rebuilding of something that once shattered. Olivia saw how the boys blossomed with him around. Jake became more confident. Noah started to open up, to smile more. They asked about him when he wasn't there. They drew pictures of their family that now included 4 stick figures instead of 3. One night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Olivia walked into the living room and found Lucas asleep on the couch, arms crossed, head tilted, a crayon still tucked behind his ear from story time. She didn't wake him. She sat down across from him and just looked for a while, realizing that for the first time in years, the house felt full. Not noisy or chaotic, just full. Complete in a way she hadn't allowed herself to believe was possible. She didn't know what the future would look like. She didn't know if she and Lucas would ever become what they once were. But she knew that her sons were happier. That she wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. And that Lucas, despite all his failures, was trying. Every single day. Sometimes, redemption doesn't arrive with a grand gesture. Sometimes, it tiptoes in through routine, through quiet apologies made with actions instead of words. And Olivia was learning that maybe, just maybe, second chances didn't have to be loud to be real. By the time autumn rolled into Marrow Bay, with crisp air and leaves turning golden across the hills, Lucas had become a fixture in their lives. Not just on weekends or midweek dinners, he was there for school projects, doctor's appointments, bedtime stories, and early morning pancake requests. The boys no longer asked where he had come from or why they hadn't met him before. To them, he was just there now, and that seemed to be enough. But for Olivia, things were far from simple. Every time she looked at him sitting at the kitchen table helping Noah color within the lines or chasing Jake through the backyard with foam swords, her heart warred with itself. There was the man who had broken her, who had vanished when she needed him most. And there was the man now, showing up, quiet, reliable, gentle. She didn't know how to reconcile them. One afternoon, after dropping the boys off at preschool, Olivia sat across from Lucas at a small cafe by the marina. The smell of fresh coffee and the sound of gulls gave the moment a sense of fragile peace. She hadn't planned to say anything heavy, but the words came without warning. "You know they're starting to ask," she said, stirring her tea without looking up. "Not directly. But they notice things. Other kids talk about dads and moms being together. They don't understand why you don't live with us." Lucas sat back in his chair, thoughtful. "What do you want me to say? Or do?" Olivia hesitated. "I don't know. I'm still figuring it out myself. I want to make sure they don't get confused. That they don't expect something I can't give them." Lucas nodded slowly. "They're smart, Liv. Smarter than I ever was at their age. I'll follow your lead, but I think they already feel the truth. That we're a family. Maybe not in the usual way, but still." The word family hung in the air between them. For a moment, it felt like a promise, or maybe a challenge. Olivia couldn't deny that something had begun to shift. Not just in the boys, but in herself. She no longer flinched when Lucas reached for the boy's hands. She no longer braced herself for him to disappear. And every once in a while, when she caught him looking at her with quiet admiration, she let herself remember the love they once shared, not with longing, but with curiosity about whether something new could grow from its ashes. That month, Lucas asked if he could take the boys to the fall fair alone. It would be the first time Olivia wasn't there to supervise. She hesitated, her fingers curling slightly at the thought, but eventually said yes. She watched from the porch as the three of them drove away in his SUV, music playing and laughter spilling out of the open windows. The house felt too quiet, and she spent the afternoon pacing between unfinished chores. But when they returned, covered in pumpkin paint and sticky from caramel apples, she saw something in the boys' faces that settled her: joy, safety, trust. Lucas had not only earned their affection, he had earned their belief in him. Later that week, Olivia found a box on her doorstep. Inside was a photo book. Dozens of pictures Lucas had quietly collected over the past 2 months, the boys playing in the park, Lucas helping Jake climb a tree, Noah asleep on his shoulder, Olivia laughing in the kitchen mid-stir with flour on her cheek. On the last page was a handwritten note that simply read, "Thank you for letting me belong." She closed the book and held it to her chest, stunned by the quiet gravity of those words. Lucas had never once asked to come back into her life romantically. He had never tried to rewrite their past or push her into something she wasn't ready for. But through his actions, patient, steady, imperfect, he had become someone she trusted again. Not just for the boys. For herself. That night, after the boys were asleep, she stood in the hallway outside their room, listening to their even breaths. Lucas sat on the couch, waiting for her to say goodnight like always. But instead of walking past him, she sat down beside him. Close enough to share the warmth of the blanket he had pulled over his legs. For a moment, they didn't say anything. Then Olivia spoke, her voice low. "I used to dream about you apologizing. Saying all the right things. But now I think, this is better. You showing up. You staying." Lucas looked at her, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm not going anywhere. Not again." She nodded. No declarations. No promises. But the space between them softened, and in that shared quiet, something unspoken finally settled. It wasn't love yet, not in the way it once was, but it was something real. Something worth building. Something that, for the first time in years, felt like home. The winter that followed was slow and quiet, filled with short days, soft lights, and a rhythm that felt more like a life than anything Olivia had known in years. Lucas had become not just a regular part of their routine, but an anchor. He picked the boys up from preschool on Thursdays, made pancakes on Sundays, and stayed late into the evenings reading bedtime stories or helping Olivia organize their growing collection of toys, drawings, and books. The boys now called him Dad without hesitation. They said it naturally, like breathing. Lucas never asked them to, never corrected them. But the first time Noah whispered, "Dad, come look," while building a block tower, Olivia had seen Lucas freeze, just for a moment, as if the word had knocked the wind out of him in the best possible way. Olivia had watched all of it unfold slowly, cautiously, but steadily. She didn't want to fall into old patterns or be swept away by the comfort of the familiar. Too much had happened for that. But over time, the weight of what she'd carried alone for so long began to ease. She no longer felt the constant ache of resentment. In its place grew something softer: acceptance, understanding, maybe even the early stages of forgiveness. Not because Lucas had asked for it, but because he had earned it. Every late night, every morning drop-off, every quiet moment when he chose presence over pride stitched together a new version of him she could begin to trust. Then, one snowy evening in December, as the first real snowfall blanketed the town and the boys danced barefoot in the living room to holiday music, Lucas asked Olivia if they could talk alone. They stood by the window while the twins spun in circles on the rug, oblivious to anything outside their joy. Lucas took a small velvet box from his pocket. Her breath caught in her throat. But when he opened it, it wasn't a ring. Inside was a simple silver chain with two small engraved pendants, Jake and Noah. He held it out to her. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said, voice steady but soft. "Not yet. I just wanted to give you something to say thank you. For them. For the chance to be their father. And for not closing the door completely, even when you had every right to." Olivia looked down at the necklace, fingers trembling slightly. She didn't say anything at first. Just took it, gently. That moment didn't need romance or declarations. It needed truth. And it had that already. By spring, the small house began to feel smaller. The boys were growing quickly. Olivia and Lucas began looking, quietly, together, for something more permanent. A house with a backyard and more light. Not a mansion. Not a statement. Just a home. They found one just outside town. It needed work. The floors creaked and the kitchen tiles were cracked, but the yard bloomed with wildflowers, and the view overlooked a gentle hill. It felt right. Like a place where new stories could be written. Moving day was chaotic, with the boys running between boxes, arguing over whose room would have the space-themed wallpaper. Lucas spent the day lifting furniture and letting Jake direct where everything should go, while Olivia unpacked the kitchen and tried not to cry every time she opened a drawer and saw how far they'd come. That night, after the boys fell asleep curled up in their new beds, Olivia and Lucas sat in the backyard under a string of temporary lights. There were still boxes everywhere. Tools scattered across the deck. But it didn't matter. The air was warm. The silence was peaceful. Olivia turned to him and said, without needing to plan it, "I think I'm ready." Lucas looked at her, unsure if she meant the house, the life, or something more. "Ready for what?" he asked quietly. She smiled, not the guarded kind, but something real, full of light. "To stop pretending I'm not still in love with you." He didn't say anything at first. Just took her hand and kissed her fingers. Then he said, "I never stopped." They didn't rush. They didn't announce anything. But from that night forward, they lived not just as co-parents, not just as two people healing separately, but as a family. A real one. Messy and human and whole. And years later, when Jake and Noah stood on stage at their middle school graduation and thanked their mom and dad for being their greatest team, Olivia and Lucas sat in the front row, side by side, hands intertwined. Not because everything had been perfect. But because they had chosen, again and again, not to give up. Not on each other. Not on the boys. Not on love. And that choice made all the difference.